Greetings, friends, and welcome to this edition of Tales from the Tabletop, the video series where I scour the internet and my own personal experiences to bring you anecdotes of adventure, the tragic, the comical, and the highly improbable, from Warhammer to D&D and everything in between. We start today with a story from Warhammer 40k, the tabletop role-playing game that is too funny, too much fun, and way too expensive. I call this story Short, Sweet, and Sorrow. A couple of weeks ago, I was playing a friend of mine with my Tyranid army. He was very confident as his overpowered chapter master charges my poor, fragile termagants. The chapter master proceeds to obliterate several of my troops. I anticipate that the chapter master will annihilate the rest on his next turn. I stare down the chapter master model and I decide I freaking hate this guy. So my turn to attack comes around and whoa, my gaunts get super lucky on their dice. 6 wounds. My opponent is still very confident. His chapter master's armor is thick. It better be. It cost enough points. The chapter master constituted about a full quarter of the army's total force. He succeeds as long as he rolls above a 1. He picks up the dice to roll his saves versus the 6 super lucky wounds that the gaunts had given him, and 6 consecutive 1s. The chapter master fall down, go boom. My opponent was dumbstruck. He immediately went outside, popped the top off of a Yingling lager, and poured some out for his poor dead chapter master. He poured the rest out as a sacrifice to the dice gods for whatever offense he had clearly caused. I like the story a lot. It reminds me of something that happened to me on the table. I started with Space Marines the way most people did with 40k, and this is more than 10 years ago. This is back when I could afford the game, but only just barely. I was playing with Imperial Guard, and for those of you who don't know, Space Marines are like supercharged humans who have been genetically altered through very difficult processes. So they are literally giants. They're regularly 8 feet tall and proportionally built. They're all built like power lifters. They're huge. And on top of that, they wear armor that is also powerful and is very, very thick. Imperial Guard are humans, just regular old humans with las guns, rifles that would in today's terms be devastating, but in Warhammer 40k terms are so weak that we would laugh and call them flashlights. Our mission was capture and control. There's 3 points on the board of supplies that have gone missing, and our job is to recover them, and their job is to take them from us. Whichever mound of supplies that you've got, that's goes to your point total and determines whether or not you end. So you need 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 of these points in order to win the game. I built the worst army to fight my opponent. I had a bunch of shooty Imperial Guards who were shooting with their flashlights and had a couple machine guns, but were spread in such a way that they really couldn't bring any firepower to bear. I seized 2 of the objectives, and then he countered with his Marines in close combat, which just goes through Imperial Guard like wet paper towels, just shredded them. I took this objective because it was on the edge of the board, and that's where all the actual firepower was. My opponent had exterminated all of the guardsmen from the middle one, and had nearly exterminated all of the guards from the one on my far left, which would probably be your right here. Nearly obliterated, nearly annihilated. I had 1 guardsman left on that point, and in fact, he attacked with 5 Marines. My guardsman got some shots in and managed to kill 1 of them before that round of close combat was over. So the game goes on. I have this objective. This objective here, he's probably got it, but we're fighting over it. This objective here, it's lost. I've got one guy there. I can't get anybody else there. And they're locked in close combat, so every turn there's nothing to do but roll dice and wait for this poor guy to die. This happened in round 2 of a 6-round game, so I spent 4 rounds rolling attacks and saves. For an Imperial Guard trooper to hurt a Marine, you've got to roll to hit, which is difficult, and then roll to break their toughness, which is very difficult because Marines are tough and Guardsmen aren't. And if you can make both of those rolls, then you get a wound that the other guy has to save for. Every single round, I got 1 wound. And every single round, that player, my opponent, got 3 wounds against my Guardsmen. The Guardsmen are not tough, and their armor is very weak. I have to roll a 5 or a 6 to survive. And I rolled successful saves, 3 at a time, for 4 rounds. On the very last round, I tagged a Marine one more time, and he failed his save. At the end of the game, I had this objective. He beat me off this one, and that was his. 2 out of 3, I should be out, except my one lone Guardsman, who has been fighting 3 gigantic Space Marines single-handed, was still alive, and in fact managed to kill one. Which means that this third objective was still contested, which forced the game into a draw. I had one, he had one, this one was contested. And he tried to save face by saying, it's just a draw, but no. You spent 4 rounds trying to kill one Guardsman, and the Guardsman got one of yours. That was a victory for me. My favorite part about the Warhammer hobby as a whole, I took the model of the surviving guy and I put extra bits on him. I took the foot off of a Necron, which is like, they look like the Terminator, like the endoskeleton from Terminator. Took the leg of one, put it on him to make it look like a prosthetic, and gave him those big beefy arms for the Catachan warriors. And I gave him a name. And that little model was my favorite guy. That's a fun story I just wanted to share. I hope you liked it too. The next story comes from Steven, and I call this story Irony Maiden. Because of Iron Maiden? Because I'm funny, that's why. Don't you judge me. Alright. Our second level party randomly encountered a Gynosphinx that we are entirely unequipped to deal with. She could wipe us all out, but since she's recently fed and isn't hungry, she instead demands a ransom to let us go. 50 gold each. The entire party is holding just under 400 gold in total, so she takes the gold they do have, grabs me, a second level cleric, telling the rest of the party they had 1 week to go get another 50 gold. They are ecstatic and rush off to get the ransom. Yeah, right. The guys in my party are jerks. They are never coming back. She flies me to her lair, a sizable cave high up on a cliff face. It is littered with the refuse and detritus of past meals. It would be a proper treasure trove for a low-level party like ours. She comes and goes as she pleases. The few times I try to escape, she bats me around a bit to teach me a lesson, but I'm a cleric, so I heal up. This is AD&D number 1. As a cleric, I have very weak fighting skills, and I cannot use edged weapons. I know that at week's end, she'll be hungry and unpaid, and I am going to be eaten, so I make my preparations. I identify all the magic weaponry littering her lair. Bad luck for me that none of the stuff is anything I can actually use. I can't even identify what sort of magic these things have. I have a bunch of magic arrows of unknown type, but I'm not proficient with a bow, so I fill a quiver with stones and jam all the arrows sideways through it so that I have a weighted, pokey cylinder. I tie a rope to an anchor above the doorway. From there to the quiver jammed into the ceiling using 4 mundane swords in crossed pairs, and the rope hanging down to within my reach. I bury the 3 spears, 1 magical and 2 mundane, in a shallow trench just a couple of inches facing the door. The butt end of the spears jut out over a large hole, 2 feet around and 2 feet deep, dug into the floor. I load every crossbow, and I am not at all proficient. I break the head off of a few bolts because, as a cleric, I'm not supposed to use bladed weapons. I'm not really sure if bolts count or not, but there's no higher level cleric around for me to ask. Lastly, I arm myself with an actual magic sword. I am not proficient, and I am not allowed to use edged weapons, but if it comes to it, I'm just not going to be a cleric anymore. Probably not going to be alive anyway. The Gynosphinx comes home and lands outside on the ledge. I shoot crossbow after crossbow at her. I actually hit her twice, but only for 0 damage, because I broke the tips off of the bolts. The fool. She steps inside, and I pull the rope, pulling the quiver out of its moorings, and it swings directly into her, impaling her with several of the arrows. 2 of which turned out to be explosive. It does a bunch of damage and really angers her. She charges, and I step into the hole and onto the butt end of the spears, raising them up for her to impale herself on. She does, and they do max damage. But they fail to kill her. I'm left with hand-to-hand combat and a very wounded, very upset Gynosphinx. She swipes at me a couple of times, but misses due to the damage and the spears impeding her movement. I take a couple of swings, but miss due to the fact that I am completely untrained with a sword. As I prepare to swing for the 3rd round, the GM tells me that the 3 points of poison damage that she had been taking each round had reduced her to -1. I had no idea if it was a poison arrow or a poison spear, but she was dead. Single-handedly, at level 2, I dispatched a Gynosphinx. She had over 100 hit points, and I had 18. When I get back to town, this is going to launch me all the way to level 5, maybe level 6. Leveling in our game is always reserved for town. So I gather the best of the loot, take a few feathers and a paw from her corpse to prove that I actually killed her, and made my way out to the ledge of her cliffside cave. I began scaling the 100 feet or so from the top, fumbled my climbing roll, and fell to my death. Shortest victory dance ever. This next story comes from a guy named Paul, who writes a great story about a character he made who was less than optimal, but still had some juice to make things happen in the game. Paul writes, I don't go out of my way to optimize when I build characters. I mean, I don't build them to be terrible, but I don't sit down and carefully work out the math or best attributes or best spells and best damage. Some friends talked me into playing Pathfinder for the first time, and we were going to an organized session. I decided I wanted to make a Tiefling Paladin. I saw that the base Tiefling got a charisma penalty to start off. Annoying, but I could deal with it. First point of being suboptimal. I had come from playing 3rd and 4th edition D&D, and Paladins had always been a melee class. I had this idea in the back of my head that being able to smite from range would be awesome. Pathfinder had a ranged paladin archetype called the Divine Hunter. Not the greatest archetype in the world, but hey, ranged paladin. Of course I went for it. Now I needed a weapon of choice, and I had just been reading the Oath of Swords series by David Weber, and I thought the character Basil was pretty cool. Not for his enormous sword, that's fantasy cliché, but for his ridiculously powerful arbalest, which he was somehow strong enough to cock, fire, and reload in less than 10 seconds. I wanted to do that. I had to look it up, and an arbalest is a crossbow's big brother. It's longer, and the bow portion is made of steel instead of sinew and horsehoof glue. As a result, to load the crossbow, it comes with a crank. I don't think human hands can actually knock that crossbow, like even with a stirrup. You gotta crank it. So, I went through multiple sessions, leveling up a heavy crossbow-focused Divine Hunter Paladin. Not the most optimal thing, but it was fun. I just kept putting feats into getting better with the crossbow. Point-blank shot, precise shot, rapid reload, and finally, crossbow mastery and rapid shot. It all came together, finally, when I told the GM I was smiting that unholy lich, and I was going to use rapid shot. Hey, wait, you're using a heavy crossbow, right? Yeah. Well, you can't rapid. I showed the GM my sheet and my list of feats. The table got to witness several smoking holes appear in the chest of a lich. Not optimal does not mean ineffective. This next story is about another suboptimal character, but I was just so tickled with this character that I had to draw him. I had to draw this scene. This was the neatest idea, and I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when they were playing this game. Here we go. Also, this is the one I've been illustrating the whole time, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was worth the wait. The story comes to us by Doyen. My character joined a group of adventurers by walking into the tavern with a bottle of Chianti and a tray of chocolate chip cookies. Esteemed friends, it is my very great pleasure to make your acquaintances. I hope you do not mind me eating, as I've not broken fast since noonsies. Do please join me in enjoying some dainty cookies and a goblet of a dry red, as I have purchased plenty to share. Thus entered Merritt Scroggins Esquire, a partner at the halfling law firm of Scroggins, and Birch. He was traveling the world to observe and classify exotic songbirds, patterned after English gentleman scientists of the 18th or early 19th century. He introduced himself as a naturalist. I believe Sir Isaac Newton also fit this mold, and for us Americans, Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was what you would consider a gentleman scientist. Merritt has terrible defenses and deals very little damage, but he is unfailingly generous, helpful, and kind. His feats and spells focus on things a mature hobbit lawyer biologist would be good at: reading, reasoning, and knowing about plants and animals. Merritt benefits the party frequently with his gentleness, planning, natural lore, and the solving of riddles. And that is the end for this one today. Every now and then when I read these stories, just the image of the perfect image that would illustrate the story for me just pops in my head, and immediately a hobbit with cookies stacked higher than he stands, which I couldn't quite fit on the page. Just a hobbit rolling, a halfling rolling in with booze and cookies to a tavern and tipping his hat to a bunch of adventurers. Just the figure, the pose, everything came to my head immediately. It's the thing I had to draw. I had so much fun, and just I wish so bad that I could have been around to listen to this character play the game and see how it went. If you like the original art yourself, it'll be for sale in my store on my website, coffeeandhate.biz. Click on store at the top. And while you're there, why not read some of my comics? In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and may your dice roll high and never be cursed.